It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is deplete. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear deplete used is to mean to use up the supply of something or to use up all the resources of something. With this first definition, many times I think about environmental sciences. And this idea that certain resources, maybe it's clean water or it's a particular type of mineral, it is being consumed or used up so that there might not be enough for the future. A second way you might hear deplete used is to mean to reduce in number or quantity. So the second definition doesn't have to be connected so much to the environment. You might hear about the number of students in a particular school um, being reduced or depleted because of COVID, unfortunately. Many students under 12 who have not been able to be vaccinated at this point in time are now catching COVID as our classrooms have filled up and particularly in schools that don't require masks. You should know that deplete is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, you're going to drop the E and then add ing to form depleting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are going to be made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, deplete, ends in a T sound. So our past tense ending is going to make an id sound. We are going to add an extra syllable to this verb. It should sound like this: depleted, depleted. Now, I've just have one phrasal verb for us to look at today, and that is to deplete of. This is something that is going to be separated, so you're going to find an object that comes between the verb and the preposition of. Deplete of means to use up all the resources that one has. So it really connects back to that first definition we looked at just moments ago. An example of this in a sentence might be, planting the same crop year after year will deplete the soil of nutrients. So hopefully we can see will deplete, that's future there, and it's separated from the preposition of by that object. So what thing in this case will the nutrients be removed from or be used? And the answer to that here is the soil. And that's why we see it kind of come between our verb and our preposition. Now, all this week, I'm going to be talking about the active and the passive voice. And before we do some sample sentences with our verb of the day, I feel like it's always good for us to review a little bit about the difference between the active and passive voice. So in most of our week's practices, I use the active voice. So my example sentences begin with our subject, the person or the thing that is responsible for the action. A couple examples of this could be, Mike has cleaned the house, Jen has planted vegetables. So in my first example there, I know that Mike is responsible for the action of cleaning, and I know Jen is responsible for the action of planting in the second sentence. Sentences in the passive voice, though, are going to begin with the person or the thing that has been acted on or that has received the action. In a passive voice sentence, the person who is responsible for the action, they might not be mentioned at all. Or if they are included, it's going to be at the end of the sentence after the preposition by. So I can take my active voice sentences and change them into passive voice. So Mike has cleaned the house is the active voice, and I can make that passive by moving the house, that's what received the action of cleaning, to the front of the sentence. The house has been cleaned, or I could say the house has been cleaned by Mike. My second example, Jen has planted vegetables. That was active voice. Vegetables were the thing that was acted on, or the things that were acted on. So that's going to move to the front of the sentence, and it becomes vegetables have been planted, or vegetables have been planted by Jen. So many times I have students ask, well, Katie, why on earth do we have these two voices? This just makes it more complex and difficult. And there are a few different reasons. Some people will use passive voice when they don't know the person or the thing that is responsible for the action. So that idea of like, we don't know who is responsible, who is doing it. And so this is a way to sort of avoid saying, I don't know who is responsible for this. There are times where knowing who is responsible just isn't important. And connected to this, sometimes writers or speakers, they really want their readers or their listeners to focus on the object, those people or things that are receiving the action. So by moving that to the beginning, they believe their readers or listeners are going to focus on that a little bit more. A fourth reason that gets used sometimes is when we don't want to blame someone. So, if there's a particular action or maybe a lack of action that has been taken, instead of assessing blame and saying this person did not do the thing, um, we can avoid it by just saying this thing wasn't done, right? So we're not assigning blame to a particular action. So now that we've introduced this, let's focus on using our verb of the day deplete in the present perfect. And we're going to make sentences in both the active voice and the passive voice. Let's start by talking about why we're using the present perfect. We might use this verb tense to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present. Or we might be describing an action that occurred at some point in the past, but we don't know when. And that might not matter, right? If it was a week ago or 10 years ago, doesn't matter. So I'm going to use the present perfect instead of the simple past. To make an active voice present perfect sentence, I need two parts. I need to use have or has, and that's going to depend on my subject. And then I'll use the participle form of the verb. Let's look at an active voice present perfect sentence. Injuries have depleted the team right before its big game. Okay, so we know what is sort of responsible for this reduction in players, right? So they maybe don't have as many people playing in this big game as they would normally due to injuries. Now, if I want to make that present perfect active voice sentence into passive, so the thing that received the action of depleting there, that's going to move to the front. So you see the team. And now, again, I'm going to use have or has. That depends on what my subject here is. The team is singular, so I'm using has in my example here. Then I'm going to use the participle been, B-E-E-N, and then I use the participle form of my verb. So you can see the same ideas from our active voice sentence being shared in this passive voice sentence. The team has been depleted by injuries right before its big game. Okay. Now, let's take a look at active voice present perfect sentences that are negative. So remember, our affirmative or positive structure was have or has, and then the participle. Now we need to insert not between have and has, or between have or has and the participle form of the verb. You might hear some people use the contraction forms, haven't or hasn't. And again, that would be followed by depleted in this case. You can see this in our example sentence. Industrial and manufacturing companies have not depleted the country's natural resources. So this idea of they have not used all of them up. Okay. Now let's take a look at the same idea being conveyed in a passive voice sentence. Okay. So Natural resources, the country's natural resources, is what was receiving the action or what was acted on in our active voice. So we're moving that to the beginning. And then we're going to use have or has, then not, then been, and then the participle. The country's natural resources have not been depleted. Okay? Finally, let's look at making yes or no questions in both active and passive voice. In the active voice, we're going to start with have or has, whichever form matches our subject, which comes next, and then we use the participle form of the verb. An example, have students depleted the supply of hand sanitizer? Right? So here we're asking if students are responsible for that action of using up all the hand sanitizer. In the passive voice, though, again, we'll start with have or has, and then we have that thing that was thing or person that was acted on, and then we use been, and then the participle form of the verb. Has the supply of hand sanitizer been depleted? Right? So this might be a question where I don't care if it's students who have consumed all of the hand sanitizer, or maybe it's teachers or paraprofessionals, other school employees. Doesn't matter. I just want to know, do we have a supply of this? Now, let's spend just a couple minutes looking at some words that are related to our verb deplete. The first word we're going to look at is the noun depletion. This can have a couple different meanings. One is to just refer to the reduction in the number of something or the quantity of something. An example of this could be, class will be studying the depletion of the ozone layer this week. So again, maybe this is a sentence you hear a teacher or professor say to help students understand kind of the objectives or goals for a particular class. So we're going to kind of look at the reduction in the ozone layer. I also want to note that the noun depletion has a very specific meaning in the field of accounting. So in accounting, this is referring to a cost recovery system that's used with natural resources. So this could be in mining, timber, like trees and wood, petroleum, you might think of oil with that. This particular definition is very specific, so if you're not in business or accounting, you can fast forward maybe 15, 20 seconds here. My example of this definition might be, have you calculated the depletion deduction? So, and that's a common phrase that, again, you would hear related to accounting, and particularly within very specific industries and the way in which they account for expenses and income. The last word we're going to look at today is the adjective depletive. This can mean able to deplete. How you might hear this adjective used in a sentence might be, are there ways for manufacturers to be less depletive? So here we might be referring to a way for them to consume less, to use up fewer resources than what they are presently. And this is a question I think we're certainly going to have to continue to ask and to examine, particularly as global warming continues to be this huge problem and threat to our everyday lives. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.